Yellow. How are you guys?
Hello, Rabbi.
Hello.
Hi, fine. Hi. Hi,
Hi,
Rebecca.
Lois.
Hi,
Lois.
Estelle.
Nice to be getting back to a routine week.
I agree. I agree.
It's very good.
Agree. I don't know. Not sure if you guys heard about this, but on Sunday, I know Sam is already going back to Florida, but on Sunday at 11:30 a.m. this coming Sunday, we're having a little program in Northbrook by me, Torah Learning Center together with Darchei Noam. Rabbi Mordechai Becher is coming in just for a brunch. We're having a brunch, and he's going to be talking. The subject is Halloween, Harry Potter, and pumpkin spice lattes. And he's always got lots of great details and interesting things. So it's you don't have to sign up. You can just come. It's going to be at Darchei Noam, which is on Techni Boulevard in Northbrook at 11:30 a.m. on Sunday. You're welcome to come.
Thanks, Rabbi.
You're welcome. If you lived in the time of the Rambam, which is like 1100s, during the 1100s, and you wanted to study the oral law, so you would study Mishnah and Gemara, and then the collections of Midrash that had been compiled separate, of materials similar to the Mishnah and the Gemara, but they were separate compilations. And then you would have a few other books available on your bookshelf. You would have Josephus, if you were inclined. You'd have maybe the writings of Philo. You would have some of the responsa of the rabbis of the Gaonic period. So those are maybe in the 700. They're being written in the 700s, the 800s, the 900s. So there would have been some of those, although it's unclear how they would have been collected, but there were writings of the Gaonic period. You certainly would have the writings of Sadia Gaon, and depending on where you are, you would very likely have access to the writing of some of the people in Germany and France, like Rabbeinu Gershom, Rashi, and Tosfot. Some of Rashi's children, perhaps, like one, maybe, or grandchildren, maybe a little bit, because they're already living around the same. They're writing around the same time as the Rambam. You'd have some of the writers from Provence, they're certainly reading the Rambam. Whether the Rambam is also reading them, it's not clear because he doesn't know. I don't know if he ever quotes Rashi. I'm not sure if he ever quotes Rashi. He might. I'm not sure about it. But you don't have a massive bookcase. There's not a ton written. So one of these books is the book that he seems to reference most, which was the Baal Halachot Gedolot. And he's the one who's organized the 613 commandments and made choices about what to include in that number. So when he's commenting, also you would have had Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, who would have been around. We saw him quote the Rif, Rabbi Isaac Alfasi, who was in Morocco. So he would have had his work. But there's not a ton of other writing that's going on. Most of the writing that's going on that you would have had would have been reserved only for the most serious scholars, most of it, because they are often commenting on the Talmud or on the Midrash or writing halachic responsa. And these wouldn't necessarily have been books that might have been on the bookshelf of, I think you had to be pretty wealthy to have books in those days, but they would have, let's say you had a run-of-the-mill kind of well-to-do person. It's not necessary. I don't know if they were reading the Ravid or if they're reading the Tosfot or if they're reading the Rif or somebody, because these are commentaries that are written with the Talmud. So you already have to be a sort of scholar of the Talmud, and then the commentaries are written along with the writing of the Talmud. So, for instance, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, who was one of the immensely influential scholars. Again, he lived most of his life in Morocco and a little bit of it in Spain. His writings, in order to read his writings, you had to have a Talmud because his writings were together with the Talmud. So first you would read a section of the Talmud, and then you would look at the commentary of the Rif on that section of the Talmud. It's not like you could look up the laws of Tefillin and then somewhere, and you'd have all the Rif's opinions about Tefillin. That's not how he wrote it. He wrote it wherever Tefillin is in the Talmud, which is in the tractate Menachos. He would go over there, and then he would write his halachic comments together with the Talmud. A lot of times he's just paraphrasing the Talmud in that section. So it's unlikely that the average householder would necessarily be reading the Rif's commentary, unless you were a scholar, or the Ravid, Rabbeinu Avram ben David, because his comments are also on the Talmud in situ, in the place where the Talmud's having that discussion. Maimonides is in many ways earth-shatteringly important, because he writes according to topic, at least in his codes. He's writing according to topic. And so now you can, if you want to learn the laws of Tefillin, you just go to the section of Tefillin, and he has all the laws relevant to the laws of Tefillin over there. And then you could go to his section on tzitzis and learn the laws of tzitzis where they were. There weren't other people writing like that. But this book that he's bothered by is an exception to the earlier works, in that what he's done is he's written a book of what the mitzvahs are. And that is a book that allows you to look things up based on topic, and is a book that would have been interesting and useful even to the sort of average person who doesn't consider himself a Talmud scholar. But so it's possible that that's part of the reason that he's choosing to spend so much time on this. It's just something that has bothered me from the beginning. why is he spending so much energy on writing this book? Because again, it seems like it is a lot to do about something that even he should consider not that important. Which are the 613 mitzvahs? Which are the 248 positive commandments and the 365 negative commandments? When it says there are 613, which are those 613? And and I'm saying again, as I've mentioned to you almost every time we do this, it doesn't seem like it should matter that much, because nobody's saying, if he says, for instance, don't include Hanukkah candles in the 613 like the Bahag does, because the Hanukkah candles is rabbinic, it doesn't belong in the 613. He's not saying that you're not supposed to light Hanukkah candles. He's just saying they're not part of the 613. And so it is with every one of these. When he disagrees with the choice of the Bahag to put this in the list, he's not disagreeing with whether or not it's an actual mitzvah. He's just disagreeing with whether it's one of the countable mitzvahs. But it doesn't seem like we have a real consequential disagreement as far as whether or not something's forbidden or permitted, or that's not his problem. His problem isn't that. His problem is just whether it should be counted. That doesn't seem, it may be irksome if you see somebody make a mistake about that, but why would you write an entire book about it and write 14 rules for how to determine what this is? And again, it's based on what we would call something agadic. The origin of this is not a halachic problem. It's an agadic issue that there are 613 commandments. There doesn't seem to be significant or substantial halachic distinction about whether something's part of the 613 or not. The Talmud has a discussion about the 39 categories of forbidden work on Shabbos, and the Mishnah identifies some as what they call avot and some that they call toldot, which are considered like primary categories and which are considered derivative categories. And there the Gemara says, what's the difference? It could actually make a difference how many sin offerings you bring. There's actual substantive difference if something is called an av or a derivative, or if they're identified as two separate avot or part of one category of avot. It could have a substantial halachic difference. I'm looking for a word, but consequent. It's something of consequence. How many sin offerings do you bring, for instance? But here there doesn't seem to be anything like that. It doesn't seem to make any difference if something's the named mitzvah, one of the 613, or it's not. But so I was thinking that maybe part of the problem here is that this book is in every book, or potentially in everybody's bookcase, and it's something they would actually read. And because of that, it's not so much, it wouldn't be, if this was just a thing amongst scholars, it may not have bothered them as much. I'm just speculating. But the fact that this would have been so popular and popularly read because it's doing something that a lot of other books did not. It's making itself available to the masses. A list of the mitzvahs is something you could imagine children being taught in school, that they would actually might even have the Bahag's book in school, and they're teaching the kids to memorize the 613 commandments. And so you could imagine in school, they're memorizing the 613 commandments based on the Bahag. And I can imagine that because there are places that memorize the 613 commandments based on the Rambam's list. There was a big push to do this in Israel, and there are different schools that do this, even in the United States, where the kids are taught the entire list of the 613 commandments based on the Rambam's list. So you imagine they were doing that based on the Bahag's list, and that people would have taken that book out and studied it on Shabbos or during the week, because it's an organized, available text about something that everybody would be interested in, and you could see people spending time and energy on it. Maybe that's why the Rambam is taking such issue with that work, because in almost every one of these 14 roots or original rules that he's discussing with us, he seems to be laying them out so that he can distinguish his list from the Bahag's list, from the previous list, when he's doing it. So it seems like he basically said it at the beginning, that his motivation for doing this is because the Bahag wrote his Sefer and he thinks there's a lot of mistakes in it. And again, that might be the thing, that it just struck me that this is specifically what he's trying to do, and he thinks he didn't do a good job of it. So
Could you
his motivation, go ahead.
could you possibly that he was trying to explicate, in his 14 principles, what are the necessary conditions for something to be included? If you want to include something as a mitzvah, what is the relationship when you say one mitzvah depends on another? It's related to one of the, exactly what are the main mitzvahs, and how do you characterize?
But who cares? Who cares? There's no halachic. This is not a halachic category. It's not a real halachic category. It's not a substantial, significant halachic category if it counts as one of the 613 or it doesn't. It's not like you get an extra set of lashes, or you bring an extra korban. There's no what. Who cares if something's one of the 613 or not? Why does it matter? So,
But
yes, there is such a thing. We know from the Gemara there is such a thing.
Mm.
There's such a thing as 613 commandments. But what is it? Let's say somebody made a mistake. Let's say what is the halachic ramification of that mistake? Nothing. He included details instead of the main thing.
okay,
I'm
I see.
saying, so what? I mean,
understand.
yeah.
I understand.
Yeah, but for some reason he insists on writing a whole book about it.
Rabbi, I would think that
Yeah, we lost you, Sam. We heard, I would think that. There you go. You're back?
Yeah, you hear me now?
Yeah.
I would think that one of the reasons that it would be important would be that if there was 613 from the Rambam and 613 from the Bahag, and they were different, then which one is counted as part of it? Does it matter which one is part of the?
That's what I'm saying. Why it doesn't seem to matter.
Well,
It's interesting.
It does.
Why? Why?
I said it does. If it's not in the 613 that we study, no.
No, but I'm saying the only reason it would matter is the curriculum of your kids in school.
Okay.
I'm saying it doesn't matter. It doesn't have any halach. Like, for instance, he's saying, do we count the 4 death penalties? He's saying we count the 4 death penalties as 4 separate commandments, but we don't count the death penalty in every time it's applied as a separate commandment. So let's say it says there's a death penalty for cursing God, and there's a death penalty for bowing down to an idol. They're not counted as 2 separate commands, even though the Torah says it separately. Now, fine, I get that. I see that. It doesn't have a halachic ramification. He's not saying that there isn't a death penalty for bowing down to an idol. He's just saying that's not counted separately. where it could be the Bahag is counting some of those separately. So that's the mistake the Bahag makes, is he counts some of the details and if you would count, and he's saying, if you start doing that, you're going to end up with hundreds more than the 613 mitzvahs. But he's not saying that the Bahag is that, according to Bahag, this is a death penalty. According to the me, it's not. They're both death penalties. He's just saying you don't count them as separate. This is how you count them. It's like an accounting thing. It's more like accounting, but it's all the same money. It's just what categories are you putting the money in? And in the end, it's not going to have, like in accounting, it could have tax ramifications. It doesn't seem, there isn't any ramification, at least that he's presented so far, to what it is. So, and he's writing an entire book about this. Because he wanted to list, this is how he said in the beginning. He's saying he's getting ready to write his codes, which is going to be a kind of encyclopedia of the oral law. He's getting ready to write it. And he decided, as part of what he wants to write it, at the beginning of each section, he's going to write those mitzvahs that are involved in that section. And then he realized that as he's categorizing the mitzvahs and he's looking back at that book written by the Bahag, his are different. And he feels that the Bahag got them wrong. But if he just lists the ones he thinks, people are going to think he got it wrong. So now he has to write a book explaining why he disagrees with the Bahag. And so he's doing all of that so that he can write this thing. And somebody might have, I'm sure said to him, why? Like, why does this matter so much to you? Okay, he got it wrong. Why does this matter so much to you if he got it wrong? There's no halachic significance to getting it wrong. The Bahag is not saying that Hanukkah candles are biblical. He's not denying the Hanukkah candles are rabbinic. He just put them in the 613. He's putting it as part of the 613. And then the question is, why would he put a rabbinic thing in the 613? It's not that he's concluding, well, the Bahag must hold that Hanukkah candles are biblical. He's not saying that. If that was the case, then that would be a significant difference, because there is a difference about how we treat halachically, how we treat things that are biblical and rabbinic. But nobody's saying that whenever anybody tries to explain why the Bahag includes Hanukkah candles, so they go, well, because even he entertains the discussion. Maybe you would include it because you think that at the core of every rabbinic command, there's a biblical command to follow the rabbis. We actually say a blessing. We say a blessing before we do the Hanukkah candles. We say, blessed are you, Lord of God, who commanded us to light the candles. How do we say that blessing? What is that blessing? How do you say a blessing to thank God for commanding us to do the Hanukkah candles when it's not biblical, it's rabbinic? So even the Rambam has to explain that, because what it means is, because behind every rabbinic edict, there's a biblical edict, and so we're acknowledging that their authority comes from the Torah or something like that. But again, that's not happening in the Bahag. The Bahag's not saying that I think Hanukkah candles are biblical. He included them in the 613. But for some reason, the Rambam is going through all of this because, and I even mentioned to you before that, again, maybe this isn't fair, but the Rambam, a lot of times when it comes to the Medrash, the Rambam chooses not to explain it literally. This happens a lot of times. He even talks about it, that you have a choice to do that when it comes to a Gadata. Sometimes a Gadata seems literal, and sometimes it doesn't seem literal, and you can make a choice. You're free to make that choice. You can even, he chooses to explain many Agadic things as not being literal. So suddenly it says there's 613 mitzvahs, and that has to be literal. 248 positive, 365 negative, that has to be literal for some reason. So that's another layer on top of this. Like, why does he even why can't he say that the number itself is like, sometimes there's other numbers when it says, and you could hear the sound of the grinding of the incense, 400 parsecs away, or there's so many times when numbers are mentioned, and even biblically, but for sure rabbinically, where the Rambam is comfortable saying that number represents an idea. It's not necessarily literal, but for some reason here it's completely literal, and it has very strict rules, and you have to get it exactly right. And he takes so much issue with the Bahag. So my latest theory, which is not based on anything, but maybe, is that the book of the Bahag is sort of, you could imagine it being on the shelf of people that wouldn't have had the other books, the same shelf that's going to have his books. What he's trying to do with this book of mitzvahs is, there wouldn't have been a lot of other books since Tanakh that have done it, but the Bahag may have. The Bahag himself may have. He may have written a book that is being treated sort of like an encyclopedia of the oral law, because it's including the 613 mitzvahs. That's how people would have thought about it. If you want to get a summary of the oral law, kind of a review of the oral law, get the Bahag, because he's got all 613. That's how they would probably present it. He's got all 613 mitzvahs, and in brief, sort of readable way, and it might have had that market, whereas the same market that the Rambam's eventually going to want, but the Rambam's taken it to a whole nother level, and so maybe this is his way of emphasizing that. Okay. I hope I will not keep on repeating this rant over and over as we go through it. It's just, I know there's an explanation, and I know I'm missing something here, but I'm looking forward to what it is. How about here? Likewise, we do not count those liable for a sacrifice according to their details, to the point that we would say the sin offering for Shabbat would be a commandment, and the sin offering for idolatry would be another commandment. So there's a bunch of different, every prohibition for which there's a Karet level penalty, if you do it by accident, would have a sin offering. So we don't say that each one of those sin offerings deserves to be counted separately. Rather, we only count the types of sacrifices, just as we only counted the types of death penalties. So the fact that you bring sin offerings, that is a positive commandment. The fact that you bring peace offerings, that's a positive commandment. The fact that you bring the Pesach offering, that's a positive commandment. The fact that you bring a Thanksgiving offering, that's a positive commandment. But that you bring it, the Thanksgiving offering you bring if you were sick and you recovered, if you traveled through the desert and you arrived safely, if you traveled across the sea and you arrived safely, if you were let out of prison, those are all cases that you bring a sin offering. But I don't list those each as separate mitzvahs. I'm just going to list this, not the sin offering, the Thanksgiving offering. So I list those as one mitzvah, the mitzvah to bring Thanksgiving offerings. When do you bring it? Under these circumstances. The mitzvah to bring a sin offering. When do you bring it? Under these circumstances. For there are transgressions for which one is liable an uncertain guilt offering, and some for which one is liable a variable burnt offering, and some which liability is a definite guilt offering. So these three offerings, the uncertain guilt offering is called an asham toloi. What happens there is, if you think that you might have done something that warranted a sin offering, but you're not sure. So for instance, there was a piece of meat, you ate a steak, right when you finish the steak, the chef comes running out, and he comes to your table, and he looks extremely disappointed, and he tells you that there were two identical steaks. One of those steaks, he found out, had not had the forbidden fats taken off of it, and one had. And then he was going to throw out both of the steaks because he didn't know which one was which, but he knew one of them had the forbidden fats on it. And so he's going to throw them both out. He turns around, and then one of them's not there. And by the time he tracked it down, he got to your table and you had already eaten it. So now you don't know, did you eat the steak that had the forbidden fat on it, or it did not? So that's a case where if you did eat the one with the forbidden fat, you didn't do it on purpose, so you would bring a sin offering as a way of atoning for eating it by accident. Why do you bring sin offerings if you did it accidentally? Rabbi Shimshon Fall-Hirsch suggests that the reason you bring a sin offering when you do something accidentally is because you are atoning for not being careful enough, not being mindful enough to protect yourself from doing something wrong. If you were living a completely mindful and careful life, you wouldn't do something wrong by accident. So, or it'd be very, very rare. So therefore, that's what he suggests. He suggests that primarily the sin offering is not to atone for sin, but to atone for a lack of mindfulness and preparedness and carefulness to keep you away from doing sin. All right, so what can you do in that situation? You can bring something called a conditional guilt offering, which means you bring this offering. It's called an Asham Tolui, and essentially what you're saying, the Kohen, when you get there, the Kohen asks you, why are you bringing this animal? And you tell him, I'm bringing a conditional guilt offering. And he says, what happened? And you tell him the whole story with the steaks. And he said, okay, because you're allowed to bring a conditional guilt offering, which essentially what's happening is you're saying, if I did do something wrong, then I want this to atone for it. If I didn't do something wrong, then this is just an offering. That's the special role of a conditional guilt offering. There's also something called a variable burnt offering, which is, I think this is an Olavior. Here, let's see, which one is this one? Korban Olaviorid. Yeah, so that one is that depending on your financial status, you could bring, this is a whole burnt offering. It's an elevation offering, which means that the animal is first skinned and then butchered, and the various parts of the animal are offered on the altar. If you can afford an animal. If you can't afford an animal, then it could be birds. And if you can't afford birds, it could be flour. So it's variable in that depending on your financial status, you are bringing something different. And then there's a regular guilt offering, which is brought in certain kind of limited situations. Regardless of who is the one who is liable for that sacrifice, we don't pay attention to the different transgressions for which each one would be liable for that sacrifice, just like we don't count lashes as a commandment and then look at the different transgressions for which each one of them will get lashes. So there is a separate section in the Torah for each one of them, and someone besides us has already gotten unnecessarily mixed up with this principle. And due to the great confusion of these matters, it's not even appropriate to answer him. So again, he seems to be always referencing the Baal Halachas Gedolos, and he, again, if we were reading the commentaries here, we would know specifically where the Bahag has included unnecessarily sin offerings. He must have included some extra cases where there's sin offerings in his number.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I always wondered, but this may sound stupid, but how do you catch a bird?
They, well, some of these birds are actually,
On the
you know,
ground?
they were raised. They were raised like pigeons. They had dovecotes for the doves and the turtle doves. So they had they had feed in the dovecotes, and they were often raised at the dovecotes, and they would tend to not fly far from them, or even if they did, they would come back to them. So they were local, and either there were some people who just caught them by hand, or there were some people who used nets in order to catch them. Those are the only birds that you use in the sacrifices, and they were you know, they were domesticated. They're domesticated.
Okay.
All the animals that are used for the offerings are domesticated. They don't require hunting in order to get them, even though there are some kosher animals that do require hunting, and those also would require nets. You'd have to, like, if you're hunting a deer, and even there's a description in the Gemara, if you're gonna hunt a deer for food, you have to trap it with a net, because it can't be injured before you slaughter it. So yeah.
Okay.
Also, I saw somewhere, where did I see this? I saw a YouTube video of them catching birds. That there was some place where there was tons of birds would land on a regular basis. And so they set up these nets. These were, you know, this must have gone on for thousands of years, because it's a very primitive system. They would wait for all the birds to land, and then the net would spring and capture hundreds of birds at one time. So I'm sure they continue to do it by nets. All right, we are going to pause here and continue. I look forward to continuing tomorrow. Also, on Wednesday at 12:30 at Mizrahi Grill, together with our regular Navi class, we're doing a siyum on Ketubot, which everybody's invited to. So that's happening in Mizrahi Grill at 12:30 on Wednesday. We're also going to talk about some Navi, some prophets. All right, guys, be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Right, bye-bye.